let me just see how difficult they really are to mitigate. I'm going to turn to an institution known to most of us called the African Development Bank, who have a number of good products and deep experience addressing some of these risks that you've identified, but perhaps might have some ideas about how to look at some of the ones that haven't been mitigated today. So, Mr. Chirwa, I'd like your views there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I would like to look at it from the perspective where we're saying, here are all the projects that countries and governments or leaders have committed to in the PIDA, for example. How do we make them more attractive for investment by de-risking them? Because the nature of risks are many, and I think they've been articulated already by some of the speakers, which range from risks that are within the control of the owners, project owners, that's the countries, the utilities and agencies of government, and the risks that are within the control or capacity to manage of the investor. So basically that's two aspects to how this risk could be dealt with. I would like to look at it from how we as a development finance institution can support governments and countries to make their projects investment ready or more attractive for investment by reducing risks that are within mostly the control and management capability of the governments and countries. And basically,
can I just interject it? As part of that process, would you work with the private sector to determine how to de-risk them for the private sector ultimately taking them on board, or how do you get to that point?
Well, as an institution, we work with both.
Right.
So we work a lot more with the public sector to help them get their projects to a state where they can be attractive for investment. But also we have operations that support private sector. So basically, if there are investors or group of investors that want to invest in a project and talk to us, then we can try to put together financing arrangements or instruments that will make the project happen. So basically both ends. Yeah. So basically, I mean, I would look at it as in terms of having arrangements and instruments. So arrangements are, how is a project structured, for example? Because here we're talking PIDA projects, these are regional projects involving 2 or more countries. And if you're talking a road corridor or a rail corridor, for example, spanning over multiple countries, different jurisdictions, different interests of the countries, how do you make that project attractive? Well, how do you reduce the inherent risk of that kind of a project? And basically it's where we provide advice on institutional arrangements. For example, now we are encouraging a lot of the countries to see how they can set up supranational agencies that have the mandate, political mandate from the countries to move the project forward. Currently, most countries are resistant to providing complete mandate for implementation, but they'll be able to undertake preparation, for example, hire transaction advisors, help to structure the project, but investment will still happen then at national level. So basically you then break down the project into manageable chunks within national territories, but built as a seamless package.
Will that get around the national different procurement regimes, or are you going to harmonize the procurement regimes even though it's on multiple countries? At least there's some kind of harmonization around the actual procurement frameworks, or is it going to be on each jurisdiction they will still have their own framework, but at least it will be clear?
Yes, currently each jurisdiction will have their own mandate or their own regulatory framework that will manage the procurement arrangements. But ultimately, we hope to see, I mean, like the ZTK here, if the governments were able to sit together and set up an agency that has a mandate across the 3 countries, then you're only talking about one procurement framework. That's the aim, the end game of integration, I think, in this kind of projects.
And I'm interjecting here because it's a very key point that we always hear about, the sort of multiple layers, different jurisdictions, multiple permits, different laws, sort of working through that process. They call it business friction. In terms of that, how are you borrowing that model from elsewhere, or is it a model that you've conceived? Because I know that in the UK they had the PFI, the Project Finance Initiatives, where they were trying to rationalize all the processes. Or is this an Africa-specific model that's been developed? Or?
Well, basically you learn from what others have done in the past, but I think this is a model that we think can work in Africa, not necessarily borrowed from any because I mean already we have regional agencies managing projects. For example, in East Africa we have the Northern Corridor, right, which is responsible for the corridor that links the port of Mombasa to the landlocked countries inland. These agencies have certain mandates, but do not go beyond the extent of borrowing or implementing projects. Those projects along that corridor will still be implemented at national level. But we think, for investors to be interested, and they only have to talk to one agency as opposed to have to deal with different agencies. If that can't happen, then you break down the project into smaller chunks and basically identify agencies. So those are the arrangements, institutional arrangements, make sure the legal framework is in place, support early grants for early stage preparation, which basically address all the technical, environmental, and social considerations that need to be put in place. I mean, if there's going to be viability gap, how do you finance that? So that all that early stage preparation, I mean, we provide obviously support for that at the public sector level with grants and technical expertise to make a project to a point where it's more attractive to engage the private sector for financial growth.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.